Julie, thank you very much. So, hi everyone. Lovely to be with you this evening. It's 20 past 11 in the evening here, so apologies if I look a little bit bleary-eyed, but I will keep you entertained at least for the next 10 minutes or so. So, Ozzy asked me to talk about how to measure success in loyalty programs, and she also said I had about 5 to 10 minutes to talk about it. I thought she was kidding. I could probably take all day to talk about this subject. I spent a couple of hours even with my leadership team today thinking about how we were going to track the next 12 months of progress with our program Nectar within Sainsbury's. So instead of getting into the nitty-gritty detail, what I thought I'd do is just think about, well, what would be the key things that I would think about if I was starting a new role? What would be the approach I'd take to be sure that I've got a really confident measurement of the success of the program? I know Julie talked a bit there about the importance of understanding your customers, having a really clear strategy, and then mapping the performance metrics you have against that, and that's absolutely key. And the important thing to say there is, measure what is important to your business, and importantly, measure what you can take tangible action against. Sorry, apologies in advance. Here comes the spoiler alert. There is no set playbook for measuring loyalty per se. There's no silver bullet, but there are a number of tried and tested territories to think about that all ladder up to a really useful suite of insights on performance. And depending on the profile of your business or your organization, each of these will have a differing importance in what defines success. So you might be asking yourself, well, how mature is the business and the program? Are you looking to grow new customers and accept that actually that might cost you a bit to do that? Or are you working to protect your best customers in a relatively mature market? First question I'd really ask is your program designed for retention or acquisition? Loyalty suggests it's all about retention, but I think we all know that that's not always strictly true. Other things to think about are, thinking about the product that you're selling. Is it something of high value with a long consideration period? So you really need to build those long-term emotional connections to secure the sale. Is the business one that needs customers to renew a purchase on a renewal cycle, insurance or mobile maybe? There you probably need to think about creating value beyond the product to differentiate the purchase at renewal time. Or like Sainsbury's, so in my world, low margin business, really high frequency. So loyalty is all about just literally securing the next shop in a way that's really cost effective. So I've got some scenarios and some things to talk about in terms of the territories that I would go about thinking about to measure success. So if we can just ping up the slide, that would be fantastic. So typically, I'll think about measurement in 3 buckets. So firstly, and importantly, KPIs. So what are the critical success factors for your program? Secondly, what I call inside-out metrics. So these are business-centric view of performance, the data and metrics produced by the program, what people do and what impact that has on your business. And then finally, the outside-in. So the flip side of that, outside-in, what customers are saying about the program, how they feel, what they say, and what's their emotional connection to your brand. So let's unpick each of those in a little bit more. So KPIs, top 2, 3, 4 things that are really the absolute measures of success for your strategy, your program KPIs. Thinking about me and my role right now, the current strategic drivers I've got are firstly ensuring that we've got a really compelling value proposition for our customers in a very competitive market where customers are undergoing kind of the burden of the cost of living crisis. We want to use Nectar to act as a bit of a lever to add additional value to our customer shopping. And so we're looking to really protect and reward our most important primary customers. So customers who spend more than 50% of their weekly shop with Sainsbury's. And we know that we'll have that right when customers tell us that we offer good value for money and we've got mass participation in the scheme. So first 2 KPIs are program engagement and customer value perception. Another part of our strategy is transforming the program to be more digital, enable greater degrees of personalization really cost effectively. So third KPI for me, is digitally active customers. And then I've got a fourth KPI and final one on the list, which is continually looking to maintain a positive ROI, or at least neutral ROI on program spend. So do customers think we're good value? Are they engaging with the program? Are we converting customers to our loyalty app? And are we doing it all with at least a neutral ROI? So when it comes to loyalty KPIs, advice here is just ensure that they're declared as part of your corporate plan and really widely understood by the whole business, just as Julie was saying, outside of marketing, really deeply into the whole business. Make sure you're very, very clear on timeframes too, because some of these things that you want to change are pretty slow movers. So value perception is a good example of that. You might want to therefore think about key subsegments, as Julie was talking about, to prioritize so you can demonstrate the movement in smaller groups of customers. All of this clearly providing really great focus, alignment across the whole business rather than just your little team. My program engagement KPI is a formal corporate KPI for Sainsbury. So instead of just having my little team of 50 behind it, I've got 180,000 colleagues all know that that's a key objective of the business and working towards driving it through. So you've got your KPIs clearly stated, socialized, shared. You've got your North Star, what next? Well, thinking now about those inside out metrics, so measures that really help you make good decisions to achieve your KPIs. I typically look at these by customer segment, as Julie was saying, and also at the program level. So thinking about customer metrics, new acquisitions, churn rate, customers in particular tiers. Then you've got transactional metrics. So what are people buying? Their average transaction value, purchase frequency, lifetime value, average items, big list there. How do customers engage outside of transactions? So the more behavioral metrics, digital engagement, participation in your gamification strategy, program usage, how and where and what are customers redeeming on? Thinking about program measures, how many points have you issued? How many points have been burned? How many rewards have been issued? Then coming on to financial measures, and this is a big one. So what is your cost of your program? What is the profit contribution? What is your breakage and points liability? Really understanding that in quite some significant detail. I can't stress enough how important that is. Make sure you know your numbers and make sure you're bulletproof. And I say that because quite often loyalty programs are one of the first victims of a cost-saving initiatives, often because senior stakeholders don't necessarily understand them because they're pretty complicated, right?
Yeah.
So be rock solid that you can prove the impact of the investment that you're making in your program. One lesson I've learned here, and top tip, be best buddies with your finance director, get them in at the ground level so they totally understand your strategy, what you're doing, what the benefits are of the activity that you're undertaking. Two things. Number one, they can really help you define the detailed metrics. And secondly, they'll definitely back you up with senior stakeholders when it matters. So get them on your side 100%. Some of the things we track at Sainsbury's in terms of finances, clearly ROI I've mentioned, but also looking at individual proposition, profitability, and also at a campaign level. We also look at the distribution of our spend by those different segments, as Julie was saying. So how much are you investing in your top segments? How much are you investing that might be money going down the drain? So really understanding the distribution of the dividend that you're giving back to your customers as part of loyalty. We also look at campaign level performance, as Julie mentioned, and here key to success there is making sure you've got a really good, strong test framework so that you understand performance and you can continually refine targeting and offers. And of course, all of this reporting needs someone to do it. So the other piece of advice I'd give on this one is make sure you've got a good, dedicated loyalty analytics team to be all over the numbers. At Sainsbury's, we talk about the power of two. So that's the loyalty team and analytics really joined at the hip. If you add finance to that mix and maybe product too, it's a pretty unbreakable team when it comes to loyalty. Now, that list could go on and on, but the important thing is ensure that those measures really roll up to your KPIs that in turn ladder up to your strategy. And then the third lens of measurement that complements those inside-out measures is the outside-in measures. So no good if we think our program's good and performing well for the business if the customers think it sucks. So really absolutely crucial that you're listening to your customers as much as you can at the same time as watching the performance of your points. We take time to, get under the skin of how customers feel about our brand and our program. Lots of ways to do that. I'm sure you've got a lot of these in your kit bag already. NPS, it's a good complementary measure alongside a number of other things. Brand affinity and warmth, CSAT, loads of other core brand metrics that you can think about there. I generally find that those outside-in measures are particularly important for brands with maybe less frequent or higher consideration products, or for programs that rely on experiences, perks, benefits a little bit more. And that's because in those cases, traditional ROI of points and discounts issuance is probably less tangible to track. So you need something solid to be able to anchor success on. Regardless, I think for any brand, those kind of outside-in metrics will help you really understand how your program's doing against the more emotional measures, but help you optimize messaging against your strategy. Right, apologies, I did say there's a lot to go at. The important thing to remember here is continually come back to your strategy, review your performance, create the right narrative to prevent rogue metrics being misinterpreted, and importantly, act on the data you've collected to make improvements across your plan. So, key takeaways from me: have a clear strategy, map your performance metrics against the things that are important, and make sure people know about it. Don't stand still. Ensure your metrics have got proper utility for you to action against. So measure it, review it, optimize, repeat, keep on moving. Create a single truth. Again, really important, because misinterpretation of metrics can be a very, very negative pull on your strategy and the ambitions that you've got for your program. And stand by your plan, build out that compelling story about why what you're doing is the right thing in the business, what impact it's making, and how you can drive customer loyalty forward, not just for today, tomorrow, but for the long term. Yeah. So that's it from me. I hope that was useful. We're going to move on to our next speaker, unless there are any burning questions right now.
We have a burning question.
A burning question. Awesome. Go for it.
Lisa.
Yeah, I would love to ask you a question, Alex. That was so helpful. Thank you. And I love the advice about making besties with your finance director. I wrote that one down in my book.
Yeah.
One of the things you touched on quite early in your presentation was the emotional connections. And I just wondered whether you could elaborate on that a little bit more. That's something that I'm planning to touch on as well, but I was just interested in some of the methods that you might use to achieve that.
Yeah, so those emotional connections in particular are more long-term measures, aren't they? So it's kind of understanding how customers are feeling about the program. So from my perspective, at Sainsbury's in particular at the moment, value is massively important, how customers feel about the Sainsbury's brand. It's a really competitive market. So we're measuring value perception, warmth to the brand, and engagement, because it is quite a transactional business that we're in. So any step up that we can make in understanding the emotional connection that we have with customers is imperative. And how do we differentiate our brand against, the very big mix of big grocery retailers in the UK? Try and set ourselves aside from just pure transactional activity. So I mentioned NPS, so Net Promoter Score. That's definitely in the mix, but I find it's a really tricky one to do anything with in reality, because it moves so slowly, and you've got to do something relatively drastic to impact that at a program level. I think where some of those other metrics are super useful is if you apply them to specific areas of your program. So Julie talked about the contact center as an example. So really honing in on particular aspects of your business and understanding how that's impacting the relationship that you have with customers on a one-to-one basis. Hopefully that takes you up nicely, Lisa.
Alex, can I just ask a question? So do you actually do surveys to your customers, or do you...
Yeah. So actually, if you've got a loyalty program, use it to your advantage. So we've got a huge panel as part of Nectar, but we are regularly polling every single week to understand their experience week on week with the brand. How do they, what do they think across a number of different brand metrics? And then we'll do focus groups and research groups every single month. So we're, customer closeness is one of our corporate kind of mantras. We're encouraged not only to kind of measure customer loyalty through formal aspects, but to get out there in store. So one of my personal KPIs as an employee of Sainsbury's is to spend at least one day a month in store, just talking to colleagues and also to customers to understand how they're doing and probe them on an individual basis.
That's interesting.
Can I just add to that, Oz? Because one of the challenges that we've experienced and had to overcome is when people talk about NPS, how do you make it actionable? And then there's episodal NPS, which is at a moment in time, and then there's strategic NPS.
Yeah.
We find that episodal NPS is a key flag in our strategies, and it's more a key flag about what we might actually put on hold. So if they're queued for a communication, but they've actually just had a poor experience of some form, cross-selling them in the next week is not going to be healthy. So we actually use episodal NPS as a measure to what we potentially might actually change or put a suppression in campaigns that are queued to go, and change that with a service type of priority message. So that's actually really powerful, but the trick is actually getting episodal NPS that's tagged back to a customer that you can use.
Yeah,
that's very.
And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, isn't it, Julie, just to have a really joined up data set that pulls together all of the various strands of data. So,
that's right.
like most organizations with a loyalty program and, big analytics team, we're flooded with data, which is both a blessing and a curse. The biggest challenge that I have is actually joining all of that up to make it actionable. So taking those signals from the contact center, even in store,
That's right.
Surveys off the back of someone's grocery online delivery, and taking that signal and using it either to suppress something or to action against.
I have a question myself, but I've also been texting a question as well from someone who had to leave. But I think I'll ask Francis's question after sort of mine, and I think this is a potentially a selfish one for myself and Komo, and now we've got all the expert call. Of course, I'm going to make the most of it. So obviously, we've been taking a pretty deep look into loyalty over the past few months, and what we have found is that a lot of loyalty programs are missing what we feel is a key function, and that's what we're calling sort of true engagement. So that could be, and we've touched on it a couple of times throughout this session, is around value adding, personalized content, might be interactive content, gamification, competitions, etc., which all can be linked to rewards, but all about connecting and amplifying people's passion points, adding true value for the customer, and building that trust and relationship. So I'd really love to hear from all of you, some of you, one of you, on your thoughts on what role that, what we're calling true engagement, fits into loyalty programs. And do you, I guess, think that maybe either your own or others could be lacking or could be improved into that true engagement side of things?
I can pick that one up first. So within my program Nectar, a lot of the activity that we undertake with customers is single-mindedly to drive sales. However, what we also try to do is blend that more transactional set of activity with some more engaging activity. So within the Nectar app, we've got all sorts of little fun, sticky mechanics that help us just to engage with customers in between the big spikes of activity. So we regularly undertake data playbacks. So once a year, we tell customers what their top products across the year have been, and whether you've been the top buyer of Toblerone in the Tunbridge Wells Sainsbury's, which gets really great engagement and shares on social media. We also do little gamification pieces of activity to drive alternative types of behavior. So the Sainsbury's brand promise is helping everyone eat better. So a couple of times a year, we do what we call the Great Big Fruit and Veg Challenge, which is challenging customers to fill up their baskets with more fresh produce, so fruit and veg, as the name suggests, and we reward them as part of the loyalty program for doing so. So you get rewarded for putting a red pepper or some tomatoes in your shopping basket, or buying more fresh veg than you would normally. So actually mixing those little engaging mechanics with the more here's an offer to get a discount on a particular product or some points on a particular product is really crucial for that ongoing engagement with the program, and therefore you can use that as the anchor to drive the kind of more transactional behavior that you want from customers.
Funny, I got an email from Qantas yesterday saying that I was in the top 10 flyers as far as miles achieved over the last 3 months or 6 months or something like that. And to me, that was like, oh, just like a little, oh. And my wife's sitting there going, yeah, it's probably not something to be proud of. Maybe you should stay home for longer. But no, I love it. And I think, Lisa, you said something along the lines of not every touch point needs to be lead to a direct sale, which I think is sort of in line with what
I love your question, because you'd think in a business like or a industry like health that it would be easy, right? It feels win-win. It's good for our book if people claim less, that means they're healthier. It's good for them if they're healthier. But interestingly, Australians, if you look at the globe and how people tend to respond to their health, we're shit. We tend to get to age 65, drop off a cliff and go, oh, what happened? All of a sudden I'm unhealthy. If you look at other countries, typically across the board, people are better at proactively managing their health. And so one of the things we're really focused on is how can we get that message across? I think COVID's probably helped. It's helped to give that a bit of a kickstart and a bit of focus. So it's helped, pivot the attention a little bit more to this conversation. But I mean, I'm just back from a study tour in the States, and talk about the need to reward the right behavior in the area of health. Like, you can imagine if you're somebody that suffers from, say, a chronic disease, and the system over there is a lot more complicated, population's bigger, blah, blah, blah. But every time I go to the doctor, I get a new script, and then I've got a claim, and then there's a reason why, you're not going to make, the payment. And like, can you imagine your whole life with living with some chronic illness, which doesn't have to be, unmanageable, like diabetes, for example, but like just exhausting. And so actually giving, our customers a bit of a boost to say, you're doing the right thing. And then when they fall off the wagon and maybe they are exhausted and they're not going to appointments, actually starting to reach out and say, being more of a coach in that area, and how can we play a role to help you manage your health for you as much as for us, but for the benefit of yourself. And I think you can start with really small things. Like, I was reading the draft of an email the other day, and I love, Shirley, that you touched on the need for technology, and this is, my space. So I love that you mentioned that. But you can get very lost in the nuts and bolts and how things work, and actually forget to show up in the right way for your customers. So the email was something like, we can see you're going to hospital. Here's how you can claim. Would you like to, it was so mechanical. And I'm like, can't we just send them like a virtual bunch of flowers and say, hope you're feeling better? And maybe start there. Yeah. And so it's kind of building more of that two-way exchange, and like being a bit human about, how to go about building that relationship from my perspective.
That's huge. I love the bunch of flowers thing. And from our perspective, it's send them while they're waiting in the waiting room, send them a quick game to play.
Something like
fun
that,
while they're waiting to take their mind off what's coming next.
I might steal that game idea. I like that.
I might supply you with that game.
Can I ask you a question, Alex? You know how you mentioned that you're bringing in some of the gamified experiences to the shopping mission. When do you plan that? Is that part of your planning cycle at the beginning of the quarter, or have you thought out that year and said, we're going to do this? At what point do you plan that would be an activity, or is it more tactical?
We've got a number of set plays, so kind of things that we do within the marketing calendar that are pretty regular. And then sometimes we're just thinking about them as quite tactical plays. To be honest with you, Oz, one of the things we're working on is how do we create that as a reusable feature within our app. So we have a more of a build as opposed to buy strategy, much to my wailing of gnashing of teeth with my friends in product. I would much rather kind of buy a product like yours and have it plugged into the app, so I can kind of deploy straight from my team's desktop, as opposed to waiting for the tech team to build something fresh every time. We're getting better, but it does hamper us in our kind of responsiveness and our ability to react to what customers are doing in the moment. So it tends to be a bit set play, and we've got a few levers that we can pull tactically, but yeah, to have a toy box of games and little features that we could deploy at will would be my dream.
I think the other thing I'd say there, Joel, is you see this trend everywhere. You know, a lot of people really pride themselves on they acquired 500,000 new customers this year. It was fantastic acquisition numbers. And typically when you look at the churn out of new customers, it's much, much higher than obviously more deeply engaged customers. And a lot of people have a strategy of, you know, onboarding in first 100 days is a fairly typical thing. We tend to look at the first year with the brand, and that's actually a much more focus level on engagement, awareness, not just all about driving the next shop or the next transaction. And I think peppering in things that are actually about driving awareness and education and engagement in the first year, because churn is typically 15-20% higher in the new customers churning out the following year, which has a massive impact on the business case, because, you know, if you're getting 500,000, it's great, but then the following year only, you know, 60% of those stay with you, or whatever the number is. So I think there is important. I think the other part there is depending on the business. So, you know, if retail's different because it's fast, it's moving, and there's always something to try and have a conversation about. But if you are a telco and you've actually just bought a phone or whatever it's going to be, you know, your next transaction is some ways away. So how do you utilize these types of things to keep engagement up with a relevant conversation and not always feeling like it's a sell? So I think there's a couple of parts there. And the third one, which I think is interesting that none of us have really talked about today, but if you take, say, a banking client, you're going to have customers in your life cycle that have previously been really high value. You know, they've had mortgages, credit cards, whatever, term deposits, whatever they've had, but they're now, you know, 65 plus, and they're no longer high value to the bank because they actually now own their own houses and what have you, but they've previously been a very high value and loyal customer to you. The problem is you can't afford to actually give away offers, etc., to them as much, because you're not going to make money from those transactions. But our focus in those is often creating a group that we know they were previously high value and they're very high tenure. And the focus there is more about engagement and recognition at the call center, as an example, of being high value, because we can't really sell them anymore. And they're not, even if we try and do an offer, we won't make money from it, but they are our previous high value, and they have a very high intergenerational opportunity with their families and their kids about recommending the bank, as an example.
Advocacy, Julie, MPS and advocacy would play a role there for those customers.
Well, yeah, but you can't afford to give away too much to those customers because they're not going to make you any more money, but they are still very important to be recognised. So I think those sorts of engagement type activities and what have you are powerful use cases there.
I fill the gaps, yeah. I mean, it feels like a lot of it all comes down to building trust, building relationships, and if you can, and adding value. And if you can do those three things, then the commercial returns that you're looking for will come. It's like build it and they will come type situation. But you build that trust, the relationship, and keep adding value and doing that in a personalized way, then that's the Mecca, I guess.
Yeah, and I think then actually proving that, you know, that whatever it might be, a message or a cross-sell message coupled with an engagement message actually drives more value than just doing a cross-sell and a frequency without an engagement piece, and being able to track that to actually demonstrate that's incrementally better anyway.
I do have this one question from Francis. So his question was, how do we believe personalization connects into customers' passions and brand sponsorship deals? So Francis, being from Havas Media, lots in sports sponsorship, etc. He's the Chief Marketing and Content Officer there. So I can understand where his question is coming from. But anyone want to touch on any, I guess, history and brand sponsorships and loyalty?
Well,
I mean, I can talk. Or
Yeah,
you girls.
There you go.
Because Lisa can talk to Paralympics.
Yeah,
you-
well, I mean, we've
you
just started sponsoring the Carlton Football Club, and I think, I mean, that was a fairly easy decision. You live in Melbourne, you sponsor an AFL team, tick. You know, you've won kind of half the population, really. But no, I think actually, Ozzy, you've touched on the Paralympics, and I mean, I guess that's a really good example. But one of the things we're spending a lot of time talking about as a business at the moment is just kind of that whole social responsibility. And so, like, we want to be able to pick things where we're demonstrating that we actually care, because it's in our ethos, right? Particularly being a healthcare company. And whether or not people are interested in that particular cause is almost irrelevant, because we see evidence to say that people are interested in engaging with a brand because they have, good morality, a good moral compass, basically. I think there's a really good example of, like, if you look at people's Twitter handles and the different logos that they use, I think as a country, we really over-index in environmental. And so just starting to pick up on like what different interest areas are and how do you then reflect that, not just in your sponsorship deals, but also in your partnerships in terms of who you choose to do business with. I think it's really critical.
Beautiful. Thank you. That was fantastic.
Jules,
I
did you
guess
want to add to that?
Look, I guess because, I mean, Ozzy, you could add just as much here. We've both worked in telcos where passion points was a huge part of the loyalty strategy.
Yeah, there too.
Yeah, so, both of us have worked in telcos where movies, music and sport were extreme components of the loyalty strategy, and that was really tapping into passion points. I think where it becomes really interesting is if we take sport as an example, is people are, I mean, Lisa mentioned Carlton, people are extremely passionate about their sports, but what's interesting for the sport is, and for the brands and sponsorships, is a lot of people will sponsor a sporting event. What they want to get out of it is obviously trying to influence or drive awareness to the customers that are in that zone, is how you can come up with a much more data-driven or data-led strategy where you're really understanding almost like the fan ID, the type of ways people are consuming their passion points, and then being able to come up with almost like a data exchange type of opportunity where you can intermingle, who are the brand's customers and not the sporting customers, who are the sporting customers, not the brand customers. And I've worked on a few big plays there before, and they're extremely powerful. Obviously, it's all got to be in a privacy compliant way, but there is definitely ways to bring the communities together to derive much better commercial outcomes from their sponsorships, because a lot of the sponsorships, people don't necessarily have a brand awareness issue. What they really want to do is try and build a relationship with those customers, but whoever's the customer is signed up to is owned by that group, but they want to try and influence. So if you take a lot of telcos and media companies, they spend all this money on digital rights deals and all these sorts of areas that they build, but quite often the value is right in with the data and working out what the data-led strategy is to support that. But I've seen it happen several times, and it's extremely powerful. It's complicated though, because there's lots of stakeholders involved with that. But I think it's extremely powerful.
I think just just one last thing in terms of because obviously McDonald's sponsors FIFA as well. So I think it's going back to Julie's point about negotiating and making sure that you really because obviously FIFA is extremely expensive, being able to negotiate financially what you can get off it, and the stream of how you can basically milk the profit from it. So we did a lot of delivery messages was where we wanted to push with sponsorship. So it's about, do you have a really strong hook with linking yourself with that sponsorship as well?
Yeah, and I think the win-win there is if the nucleus of the strategy is fan engagement,
correct,
that has a broader outcome, and fan engagement benefits multi-stakeholders. So it's actually then putting that, it's not necessarily about who the sponsor is or who's the owner of the rights or the sporting content. It's actually what's the fan engagement we can co-create together, and what's the better together strategy that's commercially viable between that.
You can't